So we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent, get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, like, he was the most notorious and, like, well-respected. There was already all this worry in the past. That summer, there had been a bunch of companies that collapsed, and people had never thought FTX. It was kind of the first time anyone thought FTX could maybe not have the money. Dark, where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be, your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually
on and a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on him. It was amazing that first of all, it was amazing that he felt like he could do
myself. They kind of shut down. Myself and some other people were saying, like, we think they're insolvent because we had taken a look at their numbers and we said, there's no way they have the money for this. They don't have the tokens.
The fact that they were all living together and fucking each other in this giant penthouse, this $40 billion penthouse, the things, it's insane. It's really, I almost wish
they bring on people like Tom Brady to promote it. Larry David in the Super Bowl. They kind of get buy-in from all these big sort of names, and also if you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China, like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here, maybe that's a big deal.
Go back to making money again.
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought like, oh, we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy, we'll restructure the company, we'll reopen. We'll just turn all the debt into new. And why is so much of your balance sheet made up of your own tokens? It's a big question. So one of the things that FTX had done, and a lot of companies were doing at the time, they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job, like be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like, you're just like, you're God mode on Ultimate Bet, where the CEO could see everybody's hands and play on the site, seeing everybody's hands. So it's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay, so he called it Fiat at FTX. But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislabeled. Very strange. And these offshore entities were also using like U.S. branches. Like there's FTX US, which was like more regulated, but not really that regulated. It's on your dollars or whatever, euros or whatever, and you put it into this crypto exchange. They have a bank, and they work with that bank. Then they exchange. A lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the like most fair case you could make about money system. I mean, yeah, especially in our modern age. I mean, it seems like you can understand where they're coming from, the average person.
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I study
people that were standing out and saying none of this makes sense.
Right.
And who were those people?
So there were a few people. There was don't invest. Like, that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few.
He blamed all the wrongdoing of FTX on Alameda Research, and he said, "I don't control Alameda Research," even though he was the owner. He's no longer not having sort of like it's maybe not big enough. You know, they're good people. A lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. They're like, look, I've been screwed by the banks. Every time the government's printing a bunch of money, where do I go? Right? You can understand the appeal, but it's just like you win. Ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX, and it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to like, even before that, I had done a show where I was like trying to break down these topics. I was like, he'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal.
Gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources. Appreciate your transparency. All this, kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that
what is it's a crypto exchange, right? So how does that work?
So the first question is when you learn about crypto. So he decides to donate dark to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his just kind of grifting here. And so but you'd see him in nice cars, and so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch.
I don't really understand what's going, like the FTX thing, for example, is the best one, because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all,
victims would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of like how the whole scheme worked. I mean, he was, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane, but service that said, you cannot move, like when I deposit with you, you're not going to touch my money. And I said, Sam, if that's true, where's the money of all these people? What that was to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing. Like they say, oh, here's sort of like the rough estimate of our balance. I mean, so it's like things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. Like they had hidden all their numbers. Like Sam was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're something, because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why, right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. All these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other, being like, well, that guy did it. Like, what? It's the hottest deal. FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh. That's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly. Initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone. And
your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party. He thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, it was
like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
This stuff went down, and a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. For one of the first times, it was kind of, so this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. I put like let's say I have Ethereum, one Ether into this mixer, right? This pool of money. A bunch of people are putting one Ethereum into this wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like, I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. Like one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and, I have to do that.
And sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this inevitable?
The son of Harvard lawyers, we just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was
inevitable.
It was inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So the person's not named in the report who was donating to Democrats. We know the one donating to Republicans was Ryan Salami. But that person eventually,
like what are the regulations in terms of like what you're allowed to do and donate, and how did he violate them?
So I think the big violation was you're not supposed to. I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of have a voice, and so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos. And like one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, "Oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director," and he goes, "I don't have anything to do. I don't know."
Do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. Success. 2 months, you're going to be making 5 figures a month. 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this to their other friends. They're all saying it's okay. Let me put money in. And it's just a huge case study that just because other people crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else. But we're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call them straw donors, because it's like, if I give money to you to give, but like, it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? Nobody's. When you withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address, because you send it to a different one. Then he comes up, prep school. He's kind of like built for success, right? He goes to MIT, goes to Jane Street as this quantitative trader. There were some margin trading accounts. And I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And they wanted. Your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime any store. We don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger, like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went?
It's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by C. You can know their assets. So it's like a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on-chain all our...
Easier or more profitable for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick.
So, analogy for losing your house?
What's funny? Yeah.
I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say I eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when I hadn't really found my footing. But throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. Do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices. And then after he made his money that way, it's kind of like, okay, it's a little bit chic to be donating to Democrats. You can do that without too much, negative press. But if I'm the number 3 donor to the Republican Party, that's going to be a bad look. Company, so they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage. Never understood how Bernie Madoff got people because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I noticed with all of these things, the thread is...
What was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show, nothing about scams. I had a channel before it. You do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild, too. The whole scene was wild.
Which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense, but this thing. So all this money's going in, and then you basically wait. And as you're waiting, Ethereum's going out everywhere. A bunch of people are withdrawing, right? Because they're also taking their money out.
Right.
By the time you're going to make some money, and so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. He's really taken that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that.
And that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud, like Mark Cohodes. He's a famous short seller. Is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam. He said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that shocking thing. And I think that shows, like, if you're running a shady empire, like, who's better than a shady lawyer to try to help you cover it up, right?
How did you get in? Finance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs, and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just the problem is a lot of it's a black box. It wasn't like he was some random fly-by-night guy. He was well respected in the Wall Street space. People thought he might take over the SEC after, like, the current person had stepped down. They thought he was going to take it over. Whoa. Like executives Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was like, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam. Through
crypto.
Ransomware. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%. Because before it was like, okay, you need to use like Western Union or sort of one of these places where you can kind of send money without too much scrutiny. Or the CEO as of 2020. He hands it to this, a girl he actually had a relationship with, Caroline Ellison, right? And she supposedly controlled it. He said she did.
It wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to like be that successful that you just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking.
Friedberg, shady. This guy
allegedly shady.
Dan Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. This guy.
What was his? I remember, but what was his?
Will fall for something doesn't mean you're safe. Like, you have to do. I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused, like, scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, it's almost used. A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So all the of was going on. Now he's still, like, trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big, like, kind of scam. I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. Or you were a grandma who just put 1 Bitcoin on there, or, more likely the grandson. He treated all the accounts the same. So when everyone came running for the money, they just withdrew until nothing was.
Oh,
or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house, like, reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in a stew. Like, actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame, like, onto Alameda and, like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me, they say, hey, you better shut up or we're going to sue you. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to stop making these videos. Reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to, and it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill, like, was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I I was actually randomly like some Z on Twitter. I probably butchered his name, but he was actually originally sort of an ally of Sam. So he invested in FTX early on, put $100 million in, and so by the third interview, I'd studied him, and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to it was the terms of this is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you, but even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit, like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no everybody. I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey, actually, campaign finance laws I've heard are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in like the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate. They're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like
whiz kid who you listen to him talk. He has an answer for everything. He's so articulate. He's so knowledgeable. Like I listened to previous interviews before he got busted.
All the crypto people were trying to control regulations to favor their individual business situation. And so CZ felt like he was being cut out in Washington. So it looks like, if you just look at their assets, it looks like they're covering their liabilities. They owe customers $10 billion. Looks like they have $10 billion. But like
regulated, like if he was doing this, like Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC. Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's like, well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it. Right. It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was...
So when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? You know, how does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
You know, now, if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank, these guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? He's like, well, you know, like think of it like a box. And, you know, you tell a bunch of investors, you know, hey, if you put money in this box, we can get some money out. We get money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round or you won the war.
Because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
And I'd go because it was like my friends like said, hey, we have to get somebody. You know, you want to go? And I was like, sure, I'll go. I was like kind of fascinated. And you'd see these guys. You know, I used to be just like you, Joe. But then, you know, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, you know, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, I found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You know, you could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it. But what? It's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your surgery. Is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. Like you have $1, I'll let you trade with $100. And that's going to be like one reason you come to my offshore exchange. I can offer you more leverage than the guys who are like, you know. And then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31. There's some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interview,
make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had backed that bill. And now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it from the arms of one huckster to another. Like it's just like it's almost to something worse. What he said in one of the interviews, he goes, no one believes me when I said I donated dark because no one believes anyone would be like, everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly. Fine. And then FTX US went bankrupt, and he's the one who put it into bankruptcy. And then he's telling everyone, oh, no, the money's actually still there. I mean, he was constantly giving a conflicting narrative. In the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about? I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized, like, oh, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology, and they're, fight, like, one of the best ways to fight crime is at their wallets, like, like take away their banking. And crypto has just really revitalized that, because the fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. He's sort of the next Warren Buffett, that when everything goes wrong, if you're Alameda Research and you're funneling money through a personal investor, that I think is the problem. It means playing League of Legends while an investor goes, like, at the time that was seen as this charming, like, genius thing.
On calls.
You could hear even actually, okay, you put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Capital, where he broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks, and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? It's just, he happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have
gay. So like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it? Like,
no. Basically, they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So hey, you're going to be the guy. Like, we had a person in the space to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems. But collateral, like dollars or like some asset, will give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin, and that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value. But now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they'd like to get paid.
I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there, so I can put my money.
So is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin
assets. You can check yourself. Like, I have $1 billion in USDC. Well, that's great, but it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion in crypto, Bitcoin, whatever. If I owe $2 billion,
right?
That's
chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real.
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16 or system to where they could see you, Joe, deposit a Bitcoin on FTX. They could grab that Bitcoin and start trading with it immediately. Even though they were never supposed to be able to balances. But oops, did I tell you about this $10 billion account? Like, I forgot. It's so silly. It's you think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth, X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back.
I watched the new CEO, talk about it.
Yeah.
About him trying
That's John Ray.
Yeah. Trying to unravel it. And it's amazing.
The problem is when at the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral middleman because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin. Like, no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then you're like, it's this magic internet money.
Magic.
How do you get some of that? How do you get some of that magic internet money? Well, you have to go somewhere to buy it, and so it's a crypto exchange is where you kind of go. You put your fiat. What are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like, they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch, and then on sticks or something. Like, it was never – the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? Most of this $10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, sort of information about that. He says, hey, we're actually, and so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. Scandal now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of of a bottom line for ExxonMobil or any.
One guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their after the fact. He's like he's still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
Money to a politician on my behalf. You're a straw donor. You're not really a donor. So Alameda was using customer funds to pay off politicians in order to try to get favor